The Golan Heights, 1964. Syria's most secretive and inaccessible military frontier. A group of high-ranking Syrian officers, proudly demonstrating their achievements, show their closest associate a line of new bunkers dug into the rock from concrete. This is Kamel Amin Taa'bet, a multimillionaire and devoted Syrian patriot who has made a triumphant return to his homeland from Argentina. He is a personal friend of the president and enjoys the unwavering support of the entire political elite in Damascus. Kamel, having inspected the impregnable fortifications, nods sympathetically. He gestures toward the scorching sun and, like a caring father, advises the soldiers locked in concrete boxes to find shade. After all, they vitally need protection from the heat. Why not, he says, plant a fast-growing eucalyptus tree above each bunker? The generals, touched by such a humane and wise idea, immediately give the order. They had no idea that they had marked the most secret targets for the Israeli Air Force with their own hands. They did not know that their friend Kamel was Eli Cohen, Agent 88 of the Israeli Mossad. The main point of this story is not whether he will be caught. The main mystery, the main wow effect, lies elsewhere. How did a simple accountant from Tel Aviv manage to pull off this incredible, ingenious deception?
10 years before his triumph in the Golan Heights, Eli Cohen was a complete nobody. He worked as a simple accountant in a Tel Aviv department store, having emigrated from Egypt. His life was filled with gray routine and boring numbers. Born in Alexandria, Eli spoke Arabic with several accents, had a phenomenal, almost frightening memory, and craved recognition. It was this thirst for fame that prompted him to try twice to join the Mossad, both times receiving a humiliating rejection. The Personnel Committee's decision was ruthless. Too conceited, a pronounced tendency toward adventurism, does not possess the qualities necessary for methodical and analytical work. Eli Cohen was too distinctive, too bright, too confident. Such a personality did not fit into the system. The rejection was a typical mistake of a bureaucratic system incapable of recognizing genius. Eli Cohen was not just unsuitable, he was the ideal candidate, but the Mossad of the 1950s could not appreciate this. At that time, Israeli intelligence needed gray mice, inconspicuous agents capable of gathering information gradually. It did not need bright personalities with outstanding memories who could infiltrate the highest circles of an enemy country and influence the defense minister. Although his refusal was perceived as a defeat, Eli cried to live a normal life. He married a beautiful girl named Nadia, had children, and continued to go to his accounting job every day, keeping track of debits and credits. But the thirst for fame and risk that lived within him did not disappear. His case was sent to the back burner of the Mossad archives. And it was in 1961 that the geopolitical situation in the Middle East became extremely unstable. The union of Syria and Egypt, known as the United Arab Republic, did not last long and collapsed. Instability began in Damascus. Military coups followed one after another, and increasingly radical and hostile forces came to power. Syria became a black box for Mossad. The use of traditional recruitment methods proved useless. The gray mice could not penetrate the closed and paranoid environment of the Syrian military elite. Israeli intelligence faced a serious problem. They had no agents left in Damascus. Total panic forced the Mossad leadership to issue a desperate order: find someone, anyone, even among the trash. One of the curators, sifting through old files, pulled a dusty dossier from the archive. They read the verdict. Too conceited? Excellent. He won't succumb to the pressure of interrogation. Prone to adventurism? Perfect. He's willing to take risks and win trust. Fluent in Arabic? He'll pass for one of their own.
The man whom the system had classified as unsuitable was suddenly recognized as their only and last hope. The moment Eli Cohen got the call, everything fell into place. He was returning home from his hated accounting job when his wife Nadia told him that a representative from the Ministry of Defense had called. Eli smiled, knowing full well that this was not just a call, but an invitation. He went to the meeting not as a supplicant, but as a man who dictated his own terms. His vanity celebrated its triumph. The system that had twice rejected him was now turning to him, and Eli set a condition. He would not work in the rear, not as an analyst, but only where real life was happening, in the field. The Mossad curators had no other choice but to agree. Thus began the most massive transformation in the history of Israeli intelligence. Eli Cohen was placed in a safe house and began to be reforged from an accountant into a spy. It was an exhausting 6-month process. He wasn't just taught to drive a car, he was trained to evade pursuit in narrow streets. He wasn't just taught to shoot, he was taught to kill without a weapon. His main weapons were not to be a gun and a knife. For hours, until his fingers were covered in bloody blisters, he practiced Morse code, striving for perfection in transmission speed. He had to learn to transmit a 3-hour report in 30 minutes. He was taught encryption, how to work with microfilm, and how to make hiding places. However, the most difficult part was the psychological component. His supervisors exploited his greatest strength and, at the same time, his greatest weakness: his phenomenal memory and vanity. He was forced to memorize hundreds of pages of technical data, types of Syrian tanks, weapon calibers, names of regiments. Then they humiliated him and insulted him, conducting mock interrogations in an attempt to break his spirit and teach him resilience. At the same time, work was underway to create a legend. It had to be perfect. An ordinary Syrian in Damascus would have been exposed immediately. The agent had to appear to be from outside, but be more Syrian than the Syrians themselves. That is how Kamel Amin Taa'bet came into being. In Buenos Aires, where his family had supposedly fled from the French occupation, there lived a wealthy businessman. Rumor had it that he had made his fortune importing and exporting textiles in South America. His image was carefully crafted down to the smallest detail: his favorite cigars, expensive wardrobe, generosity, and above all, his ostentatious, passionate love for his lost homeland, Syria. The choice of location, Buenos Aires, was well thought out. It was the center of the Syrian diaspora, the perfect place to go undercover. After 6 months, Eli Cohen looked in the mirror. The accountant was no longer there. Instead, he saw a well-groomed, smug, charming Arab millionaire named Kamel Amin Taa'bet. He said goodbye to Nadia, explaining that he was leaving for Europe on official business. He couldn't tell her that he was going to Argentina to start the most risky game of his life. In 1961, Buenos Aires became the venue for the debut of Eli Cohen's brilliant performance. Kamel Amin Taa'bet, with his impeccable legend and almost unlimited funding from Mossad, immediately immersed himself in the world of the wealthy Syrian diaspora. His plan was simple but required a high level of acting skill, which, as it turned out, Cohen possessed naturally. He didn't just get to know the representatives of this milieu, he skillfully charmed them. He rented luxurious apartments in the most prestigious area of the city and threw parties that were the talk of the entire Little Damascus in Argentina. Expensive champagne flowed freely at these gatherings, and Kamel, projecting the image of a generous and charming host, engaged in casual conversation. But his main trump card was not luxury, but the promotion of patriotism. In between toasts, Kamel Amin Taa'bet spoke with passion in his eyes about his nostalgia for his lost homeland. He assured everyone that his only desire was to return to Damascus and invest all his savings in building a new great Syria. He sharply criticized the old order, admired the Syrian army, and soon became a magnet for all the prominent Syrians living in Argentina. His generosity and oratory skills attracted the attention of the top prize. At one of these parties, he was approached by a tall, fit military man, General Ahmed al-Hafez, Syria's military attaché in Argentina. He was one of the leaders of the influential Ba'ath Party. Hafez was impressed by Kamel. He saw in him not only a wealthy friend, but also an ideological kindred spirit, a true patriot who could be very useful to their party. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing day. Kamel provided Hafez with substantial loans for his political endeavors and listened attentively to his stories about the situation in Damascus. Eli Cohen played his role so convincingly that General Ahmed, of his own accord, took a decisive step. He wrote several letters of recommendation to his high-ranking acquaintances in Damascus, describing Kamel Amin Taa'bet as a trustworthy brother and pillar of the nation. This step was a triumph. The first stage of the operation was executed flawlessly. The legend of Kamel Amin Taa'bet was not only created by Mossad, it was approved and supported by the Syrian military elite itself. Now the road to Damascus was clear. Neither Eli nor his supervisors in Tel Aviv could have imagined how resounding this success would be and how tragic its price would be. In January 1962, Kamel Amin Taa'bet stepped off the plane in Damascus. His arrival, confirmed by letters from Amin al-Hafez, caused a real stir. He was greeted as a hero, seen as a symbol of the return of capital to a country undergoing a period of political upheaval. Eli Cohen immediately set about fulfilling his mission, and his first choice of a safe house demonstrated the audacity of his plan. Using Mossad funds, he rented the most luxurious apartment in the prestigious Abu Ruma neighborhood. By chance, but by a happy coincidence, the apartment was located one floor above the home of the Air Force commander, and its windows overlooked the Syrian Army General Staff building. Kamel could watch every officer entering and leaving the country's main military headquarters without leaving his window and enjoying his morning coffee. His apartment instantly became the most prestigious and influential salon in Damascus. Politicians, bankers, and above all, high-ranking military officials considered it an honor to be invited to dinner by the generous patriot Kamel. Eli Cohen continued the game he had started in Buenos Aires, but with higher stakes. He treated his guests to scarce European alcohol and Cuban cigars, threw lavish parties with women of easy virtue, and generously handed out loans and bribes. At the same time, pretending to be a naive businessman who simply wanted to help defend the homeland, he listened carefully and memorized everything he heard. Drunken ministers and self-absorbed generals unabashedly shared everything with him. Secrets of military plans, characteristics of new Soviet weapons, names of their mistresses, and even their secret fears. Every night, when the last visitor left the apartment, Kamel locked himself in his study. A transmitter hidden in expensive furniture came to life, and valuable information flowed continuously to Tel Aviv. But this brilliant success had a dark, hidden side. In the shadow of this triumph lurked a man to whom the whole picture seemed too perfect. A new, deadly antagonist had appeared in the system. He was Colonel Ahmed As-Suaidani, the new head of the Syrian Counterintelligence Service, the Mukhabarat. Unlike the generals, who were prone to boasting and drunkenness, Al-Suaidani was an ascetic, a true professional, and a man suffering from paranoia. He did not like the fact that some stranger from Argentina had so quickly and easily won the trust of the entire elite. Al-Suaidani was not happy that this patriot's apartment had such a view of the general staff's windows. As-Suaidani could not prove anything against Kamel, who had an impeccable reputation.
Nevertheless, As-Suaidani took note of the businessman and quietly launched his own investigation.
On March 8, 1963, Damascus awoke to the sound of tanks. Another military coup had taken place in Syria. The Ba'ath Party came to power. Eli Cohen, in his apartment, could only listen to the rumbling in the streets. Soon, the name of the country's new leader, the new president, became known. It was Amin al-Hafez, an old acquaintance of Kamel from Buenos Aires. For Eli Cohen, this was not just luck. It was a chance to gain access to incredible, completely exclusive circles of influence. In a matter of moments, he went from being an influential businessman to a close friend and confidant of the president himself. He now had unlimited access to classified information. He went from eavesdropping to being consulted. In his apartment, generals and ministers were no longer discussing gossip, but specific details of government plans. It was during this period that Kamel Amin Taa'bet accomplished his greatest feat. During one of their private meetings, President al-Hafez, showing complete trust in the patriot Kamel, arranged a confidential inspection trip for him to the Golan Heights, a place of exceptional importance.
Eli Cohen, accompanied by high-ranking Syrian generals, spent several days inspecting the fortified area. He became the only civilian allowed to visit this closed military facility. While inspecting the line of defense, standing on the edge of a bunker, he offered the humane advice to plant eucalyptus trees over each firing point. But that was not the only thing he remembered. During the trip, he managed to memorize the exact location of every artillery battery, every minefield, and every tank trap. Upon his return to Damascus, he learned of Syria's large-scale strategic project to divert the waters of the Jordan River. The plan was to deprive Israel of a significant portion of its fresh water, which would be a direct cause for war. Thanks to his connections with the project's chief military engineer, Kamel obtained the complete engineering drawings. He immediately forwarded them to Tel Aviv. Based on the information provided, the Israeli Air Force carried out a series of precision strikes, destroying all the construction equipment and effectively halting the project. The value of the data obtained was so great that rumors circulated in Damascus that Kamel Amin Taa'bet was being considered for the position of Deputy Minister of Defense of Syria. Instead of supporting him, his boss subjected him to severe psychological pressure, manipulating the same thing that Eli had used to recruit him, his vanity. He was made to believe that he was irreplaceable, that only he was capable of completing the mission, that without him, everything would go downhill. He was told that he was a hero who had no right to retreat. Eli, a tragic genius, broken by his own fame and unable to resist the system that had finally honored him with recognition, meekly surrendered. His return to Damascus in November 1964 marked the beginning of the end. He was no longer the brilliant and calculating Kamel. The man who returned to Syria was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, doomed to certain death. As if seeking destruction, he became reckless and impulsive, breaking the cardinal rule of a radio operator. He began to appear on the air too often and, fatally, at the same time every morning at 8 o'clock. It was practically suicide, a direct invitation to be discovered. And Colonel Ahmed As-Suaidani, who had been patiently waiting for his moment all this time, finally got what he wanted. He got the pattern he needed. Along with it, modern radio interception equipment arrived in the Soviet Union, direction finders that could determine the source of a signal with remarkable accuracy. In January 1965, Ahmed As-Suaidani was ready. He sat in a van equipped with advanced Soviet radio equipment and waited patiently. His team had been using these direction finders for several weeks to locate an apartment in the Abu Rumman neighborhood, but dense white noise, the work of dozens of military and diplomatic transmitters, prevented them from pinpointing its location. In Damascus, As-Suaidani took an unprecedented but ingenious step.
He ordered a complete radio blackout. For several hours, the city fell silent. Military bases, diplomatic missions, security services, all were required to cease all radio transmissions under threat of prosecution. And in this absolute silence, which seemed to ring out, at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a thin, solitary signal sounded over the airwaves. Beep, 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 beep. It was Eli Cohen, who, following his fateful schedule, had come on the air. At that moment, the technicians in the van cried out in delight. All the needles on the instruments coincided at a single point: the building, the floor, the apartment. The Syrian Mukhabarat capture team, lying in wait, rushed upstairs, broke down the door to Kamel Amin Taa'bet's apartment, and took him by surprise. He didn't even have time to turn off the equipment. The transmitter was still warm on the table, and he was holding the encryption code for Tel Aviv in his hands. The perfectly planned deception had been exposed.
The humiliation experienced by the Syrian elite was truly shocking. It was not just the exposure of a spy, it was the complete and utter collapse of their world. Their closest friend, the patriot Kamel, a man who was part of their circle, who knew their wives and played with their children, turned out to be an Israeli agent. For President Amin al-Hafez, it was not only a political betrayal, but also a deeply personal one. He was desperate with rage, feeling like a fool who had been easily deceived by a simple accountant. Eli Cohen was tortured with particular cruelty, but their motives were not so much to obtain information as to take revenge. They sought to break him, to make him repent for what he had done. But Eli remained silent. He did not reveal any codes, names of other agents, or details of his training. He took full responsibility. Israel and the Mossad, realizing the gravity of the situation, threw all their resources into saving him. They offered to exchange him for dozens of Syrian prisoners of war. They were prepared to pay millions of dollars.
The leaders of France and Belgium, as well as the Pope, personally appealed to al-Hafez for clemency. But the president was adamant. He did not want a deal, but rather loud and public retribution for the humiliation. The trial was short and demonstrative, and the verdict was known in advance. On May 18, 1965, Eli Cohen, physically broken but still morally strong, was dressed in a white robe. A huge poster listing all his crimes against Syria was hung on his chest. He was publicly hanged in Marjah Square in Damascus, and his body was left hanging for several hours as a lesson to all.
Eli Cohen's death was not the end of his story. His greatest success came after his death. 2 years later, in June 1967, the Six-Day War began. The Israeli army launched an attack on the Golan Heights. Thanks to the detailed maps, coordinates, and diagrams provided by Eli Cohen, the Israeli Air Force had accurate information about the location of every Syrian battery and every bunker. And the eucalyptus trees that he recommended planting to provide shade turned out to be ideal landmarks for the bombers. The impenetrable defensive line that Syria had built over many years was completely destroyed in just a few hours. Eli Cohen deceived an entire country and single-handedly changed the course of history in the Middle East. However, this tragic genius fell victim to the very system he had so brilliantly served. A system that first rejected him, exploited his abilities to the point of exhaustion, and failed to help him at the most critical moment. Despite numerous appeals from his family, the Syrian government has still not returned Eli Cohen's remains.